The day a billionaire landed a helicopter on the ashes of my farm, my daughter-in-law nearly dropped her coffee. 6 days earlier, she had called me homeless. My name is Evelyn Parker. I was 71 years old, and until that terrible week, I had spent nearly my entire life on the same stretch of land outside a small town in Iowa. My husband and I built our farm from nothing but hard work, stubbornness, and faith that tomorrow would be better than today. For more than 40 years, that land fed our family, paid our bills, and gave us a place to call home. Then one terrible afternoon changed everything. But before I tell you about the fire, you need to understand what happened the morning the helicopter arrived. The sky was clear and cold. A thin layer of frost still covered parts of the blackened field. The farmhouse was gone. The main barn was gone. Most of what had once defined my life existed only as charred remains scattered across several acres. I stood near the temporary trailer a local church had arranged for me. It was small and cramped, and nothing like the home I had lost, but I was grateful to have a roof over my head. A few neighbors had stopped by to check on me. Across the road, several people stood watching as the distant sound grew louder. At first, nobody understood what they were hearing. Then the helicopter appeared over the horizon. It moved steadily toward my property before circling once above the ruined fields. The noise drew more people outside. Trucks pulled onto the shoulder of the road. Farmers stepped away from equipment. Within minutes, half the town seemed to be staring at my land. The helicopter descended slowly and settled onto an open patch of ground near what remained of the old equipment shed. Dust and loose grass swirled through the air. Nobody spoke. Everyone simply watched. The door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark overcoat. Even from a distance, several people recognized him immediately. I heard whispers spread through the crowd. His face had appeared in magazines, business articles, and television interviews for years. He was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. A billionaire. Yet the moment he saw me, he smiled like someone returning home. Before I could take a single step forward, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. My son Ryan climbed out. His wife Claire followed close behind. They looked confused. Then they saw the helicopter. Then they saw the man walking toward me. Claire's expression changed instantly. 6 days earlier, she had stood in her kitchen with her arms crossed and told me that people who lost everything eventually became someone else's problem. She did not think I hurt her. I did. Ryan had remained silent. Sometimes silence hurts more than words. Now both of them stared across the field as the billionaire approached. I could see questions forming behind their eyes. How did I know him? Why was he here? What was happening? The truth was, I had been asking myself some of those same questions only a few days earlier. Because when my family turned away from me after the fire, there was only one person I could think to call. A little boy I used to babysit more than 30 years ago. What I did not know then was that one phone call was about to change everything. 6 days before that helicopter touched down on my property, I stood in the middle of what remained of my life. The fire itself had already been extinguished. The smoke was gone. The emergency crews had left. The reporters had moved on to other stories. What remained was silence. The kind of silence that settles over a place after something important disappears. I walked slowly across the damaged ground, trying to recognize pieces of the farm that had shaped my entire adult life. The old red barn where my husband and I stored hay every winter was gone. The equipment shed where he spent countless evenings repairing tractors was gone. Decades of work had vanished in a matter of hours. I remember standing there with my hands buried in my coat pockets, staring at the horizon and wondering what came next. At 71 years old, starting over was not a comforting thought. The insurance company had already explained that the process would take time. A great deal of time. Some losses would be covered. Others would not. Every conversation seemed to end with paperwork, delays, and uncertainty. I told myself I could handle it. Farmers learn resilience early. Crops fail. Storms come. Equipment breaks. Life moves forward anyway. What I was not prepared for was my own family. The day after the fire, Ryan drove out to see me. Claire came with him. I thought they were there to help. I thought they were there because families support each other during difficult times. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. Ryan asked how I was doing. Claire offered a sympathetic smile. We stood beside a temporary fence looking across the damaged fields. Then the conversation changed. Claire asked what I planned to do next. I told her I did not know yet. It had only been one day. She nodded thoughtfully before explaining that rebuilding would be expensive. Ryan agreed. He mentioned my age. He mentioned retirement. He mentioned practicality. None of those words sounded cruel by themselves. Together, they felt different. Claire eventually suggested that perhaps it was time to accept reality and move on from farming. I asked where exactly she expected me to go. She looked at Ryan before answering. Neither seemed eager to discuss specifics. That silence told me more than words could have. Later that afternoon, I stopped by their house to pick up a few personal items I had stored there years earlier. Claire did not realize I was standing near the kitchen doorway when she began speaking to a friend on the phone. Her voice carried clearly through the room. She said that once someone loses everything, they eventually become dependent on other people. Then she laughed softly and used a word I will never forget. Homeless. The conversation continued. I did not. I quietly turned around and walked back outside. Ryan never said those words. In some ways, that made it worse. He simply allowed them to exist. That evening, I sat alone inside the small trailer provided by the church. A folding table served as my dining room. A narrow bed occupied one corner. Rain tapped softly against the metal roof. For the first time since the fire, I cried. Not because of the buildings. Not because of the money. I cried because I realized the people I loved were already discussing my future as though I no longer belonged in it. Around midnight, after the tears stopped, I opened an old photo box I had rescued from the farmhouse years earlier. Inside were dozens of pictures from another lifetime. Family gatherings. County fairs. School events. Then one photograph caught my attention. A nervous 12-year-old boy standing beside me at a church picnic. The moment I saw his face, a name entered my mind for the first time in decades. Ethan Brooks. For several minutes, I sat there holding that photograph and staring at the face of a boy I had not thought about in years. Ethan Brooks had been 12 when that picture was taken. His mother worked long shifts at the county hospital, and his father traveled frequently for work. There were entire summers when Ethan spent more time at my farm than he did at his own house. Back then, my husband Robert and I never thought much about it. He was simply a good kid who needed a place to feel welcome. Every morning during school breaks, he would ride his bicycle down the gravel road and show up before breakfast. Sometimes he helped feed the chickens. Sometimes he followed Robert around asking endless questions about tractors and machinery. Most of the time, he sat at my kitchen table finishing homework while I baked pies or prepared lunch. Looking at that old photograph brought back memories I had not revisited in decades. Ethan had always been different from the other children. He was quiet, thoughtful, curious about everything. While other boys his age talked about sports or video games, Ethan wanted to discuss books, inventions, and ideas. He carried a notebook everywhere and filled it with sketches and plans for things he hoped to build someday. Most people dismissed those dreams as childhood imagination. Robert never did. Neither did I. We listened. We encouraged him. We treated him like family. As the rain continued tapping against the trailer roof, I pulled more photographs from the box. There was Ethan standing beside Robert at the county fair. Ethan helping repair a fence after a spring storm. Ethan holding a blue ribbon he had won at a science competition. One memory returned. More clearly than the others. He was 14 and had just been rejected from a special summer program in Des Moines. He arrived at the farm looking defeated. I remember sitting with him on the front porch for nearly 2 hours while he talked about how unfair life felt. Before he left that evening, I told him something my father used to tell me. I said that disappointment was not a stop sign. It was a detour. Sometimes the road changed because something better waited ahead. Ethan never forgot that conversation. At least that is what he told me years later. The strange thing was that after he left for college, life carried us in different directions. I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. Then the updates became newspaper articles. Then television interviews. Ethan built a technology company. Then another. His success grew so quickly that people in town spoke about him almost like a local legend. Meanwhile, life on the farm continued. Seasons changed. Crops came and went. Robert passed away. The years moved forward. Eventually, I stopped expecting our paths to cross again. Yet now, sitting alone inside that trailer, I found myself wondering whether he would even remember me. The idea felt foolish. Why would a billionaire remember an elderly woman from a small Iowa farm? Still, I could not shake the feeling. Sometimes a name appears in your mind for a reason. The next morning, I visited the local library because the internet service near the temporary trailer was unreliable. I searched for information about Ethan. There were articles everywhere. Business magazines. Television interviews. Corporate announcements. One article mentioned the headquarters of his company. Another listed a public contact number. I copied it onto a scrap of paper and slipped it into my purse. For the rest of the day, I carried that number with me. I told myself I probably would not call. It seemed ridiculous. Yet by sunset, I found myself staring at the paper again. And before I could talk myself out of it, I reached for the phone. My finger hovered over the call button for nearly a minute before I finally pressed it. The number connected to a corporate switchboard. Somewhere hundreds of miles away from my little town in Iowa. A pleasant voice answered and asked how she could help me. The moment she said the company name, I almost hung up. What was I doing calling one of the most successful business leaders in America? I was a 71-year-old farmer sitting alone in a temporary trailer surrounded by uncertainty. Yet something told me to stay on the line. I introduced myself and explained that I was hoping to leave a message for Ethan Brooks. There was a pause. Then the woman politely informed me that Mr. Brooks received thousands of messages every week. I understood. Of course he did. I thanked her for her time and prepared to end the call. Then she asked a simple question. What is the nature of your relationship with Mr. Brooks? I almost laughed. Relationship was not the word I would have used. I told her that many years ago, when Ethan was a boy, I used to babysit him and that I simply wanted to say hello. Another pause followed. Then she asked me to hold. Soft music played through the phone. I expected to be disconnected at any moment. Instead, several minutes passed. I stared at the rain outside the trailer window and wondered why I had even called. Then the music stopped. A different voice came on the line. A man's voice. Familiar somehow despite the decades that separated us. He said my name before I could speak. Evelyn? For a moment, I could not answer. The years disappeared all at once. He sounded older, of course, but the warmth in his voice was exactly the same. I finally managed to say hello. Ethan laughed softly. Then he asked a question that caught me completely off guard. How have you been? Not what do you need? Not why are you calling? How have you been? Nobody had asked me that since the fire. We spoke for nearly 20 minutes. He remembered details I thought had long been forgotten. He remembered Robert teaching him how to repair a fence. He remembered the apple pies I used to bake every summer. He remembered sitting at our kitchen table working on science projects. Most surprising of all, he remembered that conversation on the porch after he was rejected from the summer program. He repeated my father's words almost perfectly. Disappointment is not a stop sign. It is a detour. Hearing those words again brought tears to my eyes. Eventually Ethan asked what had prompted the call. I told him the truth. I told him about the fire. I told him about the losses. I told him that I was safe but uncertain about the future. I did not ask for money. I did not ask for favors. I simply explained what had happened. The line became quiet. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan asked for the address of the farm. I gave it to him. He thanked me and said he would call again soon. That was all. No promises. No dramatic statements. No grand plans. When the call ended, I felt strangely lighter. Not because I expected anything to happen. Because someone remembered. Someone who owed me nothing had listened. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. By noon, 2 people from Ethan's office had contacted me. And by sunset, I realized that the phone call I almost never made had set something extraordinary into motion. The following morning began like any other since the fire. I woke up early because years of farm life had trained my body to rise before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I opened my eyes and saw the narrow walls of the trailer instead of my bedroom, and reality returned. I made a cup of coffee using the small machine someone from the church had donated and sat beside the window watching the first light spread across the damaged fields. That was when I noticed the missed calls on my phone. 3 unfamiliar numbers. At first, I assumed they were insurance representatives or contractors. Since the fire, my phone had been ringing constantly. I returned the first call. A woman introduced herself as a member of Ethan Brooks's executive team. The second call came from another person in his office. By the time I finished speaking with both of them, I realized something unusual was happening. Neither person discussed money. Neither person made promises. Instead, they asked questions. Detailed questions. They wanted to know about the farm. The acreage. The buildings. The history of the property. They asked about my immediate needs and whether I had access to housing, transportation, and legal assistance. The conversations felt professional but surprisingly personal. Most importantly, they listened. Later that afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the gravel driveway. 2 people stepped out carrying clipboards and cameras. They introduced themselves as specialists working with Ethan's organization. Again, they did not offer dramatic solutions. They simply walked the property and documented everything. They took photographs. They examined structures. They asked respectful questions about what had been lost and what could potentially be rebuilt. As we walked across the farm, I found myself telling stories I had not shared in years. I pointed to the area where Robert taught our son how to drive a tractor. I showed them where we held family cookouts every 4th of July. I explained how each building had served a purpose. By the end of the visit, one of them smiled and said something that stayed with me. This place matters to people. Not just because it is property. Because it represents a life. That evening, Ryan called. It was the first time he had contacted me in several days. His tone seemed different. More attentive. He asked how I was doing and whether I needed anything. The concern sounded genuine, but I could not ignore the timing. News travels quickly in small towns. By then, Several neighbors had already seen the visitors walking my land. I thanked him for calling and told him I was managing. Before ending the conversation, he casually asked whether anyone had come to inspect the property. I answered honestly. Yes. There was a brief silence on the line. Then he changed the subject. The next day, things became even stranger. A local newspaper published a short article about Ethan's representatives visiting the farm. The story was not dramatic. It simply mentioned that the billionaire entrepreneur had taken an interest in helping a longtime family friend. Apparently, that was enough. Suddenly, people who had not spoken to me in months began reaching out. Former acquaintances, distant relatives, community members. Everyone seemed curious. Everyone wanted details. Claire called twice that day. I did not answer either call. Not because I was angry. Because I wanted time to think. Late that evening, my phone rang again. This time, it was Ethan himself. He sounded tired, as though he had just finished a long day. Yet he seemed genuinely interested in hearing how I was doing. We spoke for nearly half an hour. Near the end of the conversation, he told me he had been reviewing information about the farm all week. Then he said something I never expected to hear. "Evelyn, I think it is time I came home for a visit." The moment those words left his mouth, I knew the next few days were going to change more than just my future. For the next 2 days, the entire town seemed to be waiting for something. Nobody knew exactly what Ethan Brooks planned to do, but everyone knew he was coming. In a community as small as ours, news traveled faster than the weather. By Wednesday morning, people at the diner were discussing flight schedules. The cashier at the grocery store asked whether I had spoken to him recently. Even my pastor smiled and said he was curious to see the boy who used to sit in the third pew every Sunday beside his mother. I found the attention slightly uncomfortable. My life had always been simple. The farm. My family. My neighbors. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know what would happen next. The truth was that I did not know either. Ethan had promised only a visit. Nothing more. I tried to keep my expectations realistic. After all, successful people often have demanding schedules. Plans change. Circumstances interfere. Still, I could not deny a growing sense of anticipation. On Thursday afternoon, Ryan stopped by the trailer unexpectedly. He brought coffee and a box of pastries from a bakery in town. It was a thoughtful gesture. Months earlier, I would have appreciated it without hesitation. Now I found myself wondering whether he would have made the same effort if Ethan's name had never entered the conversation. Ryan seemed nervous. He spent several minutes discussing ordinary topics before finally asking whether Ethan was really coming. I told him yes. He nodded and stared out the window toward the damaged fields. Then he mentioned that Claire had been feeling bad about some things she said after the fire. I listened quietly. The apology never actually arrived. Instead, Ryan explained her intentions. He explained her stress. He explained her concerns. By the time he left, I realized he had spent 20 minutes defending Claire without once addressing the words that had hurt me. Sometimes people want forgiveness more than accountability. That evening, Claire called again. This time I answered. Her voice sounded unusually warm. She asked how I was feeling. She asked whether I needed groceries. She even suggested having dinner together sometime soon. The sudden change in tone was impossible to ignore. A week earlier, she had been discussing my future as though I were an inconvenience. Now she sounded eager to rebuild bridges. I remained polite. I thanked her for calling. Then I wished her a good evening and ended the conversation. The following morning, I received another call from Ethan. He sounded excited. Not because of business. Not because of publicity. Because he was coming home. During our conversation, He spoke about the farm in remarkable detail. He remembered the pond near the south pasture. He remembered the swing Robert built beneath the oak tree. He remembered feeding calves before school. Listening to him describe those memories felt like opening a time capsule. Then he said something that surprised me. "Evelyn, some of the most important lessons of my life came from that farm." Nobody had ever described my property that way before. To most people, it was simply land. To Ethan, it represented opportunity, encouragement, and belonging. Later that day, several vehicles arrived carrying surveyors and engineers. They spent hours walking the property alongside members of Ethan's team. Neighbors gathered near the road to watch. Questions spread throughout town. Rumors spread even faster. Some people believed Ethan planned to purchase the farm. Others thought he intended to build something entirely new. I ignored the speculation. The only thing that mattered to me was that someone cared enough to show up. As sunset approached, one of Ethan's assistants handed me a simple schedule. His arrival was planned for the following morning. Estimated landing time, 10:15. I looked at the paper for several seconds before folding it carefully and placing it in my purse. Less than 24 hours remained. By this time tomorrow, the little boy I once babysat would be standing on my farm again, and I had a feeling none of us were prepared for what would happen after that. The sound reached us before the helicopter appeared. At first it was nothing more than a distant vibration rolling across the winter sky. Then heads began turning toward the horizon. Neighbors stepped out of trucks. Farmers climbed down from equipment. People gathered along the roadside, shielding their eyes from the sun as they searched the sky. I stood near the edge of the property with my coat pulled tight against the cold wind. Beside me were several members of Ethan's team, quietly reviewing notes and maps. A few hundred feet away, Ryan and Claire had just arrived. Neither of them spoke much. They simply watched. The helicopter appeared moments later, moving steadily toward the farm. It circled once above the damaged fields before beginning its descent. Dust and loose grass swirled through the air as it settled onto an open section of land near the remains of the old equipment shed. The crowd fell silent. The engine powered down. The door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark overcoat and brown boots that looked more appropriate for a farm than a corporate boardroom. For a moment, I saw flashes of the boy he used to be. Then he smiled. The same smile. The same warmth. Ethan walked directly toward me without hesitation. Cameras from local reporters clicked somewhere behind the crowd, but he paid no attention to them. Neither did I. When he reached me, he wrapped me in a gentle hug and said something that immediately brought tears to my eyes. He said, "I am sorry it took me this long to come back." I laughed softly and told him that he seemed to have been busy. Several people nearby smiled. The tension eased slightly. Then Ethan looked across the property. His expression changed. Not because of the damage itself. Because he understood what the farm represented. He remembered. As we walked together across the land, he pointed out places he still recognized. The pond. The south pasture. The old oak tree where Robert had built a swing decades earlier. Some landmarks remained. Others existed only in memory. At one point, Ethan stopped and stared at the empty space where the barn once stood. He shook his head slowly. Then he turned toward me and asked if I remembered the winter his family nearly moved away. Of course I did. His father had lost a job. Money was tight. Ethan had been terrified of leaving town and losing his friends. Ethan smiled and reminded everyone standing nearby that Robert had spent evenings helping his father repair machinery for extra income and that I had watched him after school so his parents could work. He spoke about those years with a level of gratitude that surprised even me. To him, those acts had never been small. They had mattered. As more people gathered around, Ethan continued sharing stories. He talked about the encouragement he received at our kitchen table. He talked about the advice Robert offered. He talked about the confidence he gained because someone believed in him when he was just a shy kid with impossible dreams. Ryan stood quietly listening. Claire remained unusually silent. For perhaps the first time since the fire, neither of them seemed focused on what could be gained. They were simply witnessing a version of my life they had never bothered to understand. Then Ethan looked toward the damaged fields again and said something that caused everyone around us to fall completely silent. He said this farm helped build the person I became. And I intend to make sure it has a future. The moment those words left his mouth, every person there realized this visit was about far more than nostalgia. After Ethan spoke those words, the atmosphere on the farm changed completely. People no longer looked at the burned fields with sympathy alone. They looked at them with possibility. For the next several hours, Ethan and his team met with engineers, insurance representatives, and local officials. I stayed nearby, answering questions when needed, but mostly observing. The little boy, who once carried a notebook full of dreams, now carried himself with quiet confidence. What impressed me most was not his success. It was his attention. He listened to everyone. He asked thoughtful questions. He treated the oldest farmer and the newest employee with the same respect. That evening, Ethan asked if we could walk the property alone. The winter sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the fields. We moved slowly, stopping often as memories surfaced. At one point, we reached the old oak tree. The swing was gone, but the tree remained. Ethan smiled and told me he used to sit there imagining what his future might look like. Then he admitted something I never expected to hear. He said there were moments during his early career when he nearly gave up. Business failures. Financial pressure. Long nights filled with doubt. During those difficult periods, he often remembered conversations from our kitchen table. He remembered Robert's patience. He remembered my encouragement. Most of all, he remembered feeling valued. Not for what he might become. For who he already was. Hearing that brought tears to my eyes. As parents and caregivers, we rarely know which moments matter most. Sometimes a simple kindness becomes part of someone else's foundation. The next morning, Ethan invited several community leaders to the farm. Representatives from local charities arrived. Agricultural experts arrived. A few reporters arrived as well. By noon, a formal announcement was made. Ethan planned to fund a major rebuilding effort. The farmhouse would be rebuilt. The barn would be rebuilt. Modern equipment and updated infrastructure would be added where appropriate. But that was only part of the plan. He also announced the creation of a community agricultural education program that would operate from the property and help young people interested in farming, technology, and small business development. The crowd applauded. Some people cheered. Others simply stood quietly, absorbing what they had just heard. Then something happened that I found even more surprising. Claire approached me. For several seconds, she struggled to find the right words. Her confidence was gone. The certainty she carried after the fire had disappeared. She finally apologized. Not for one comment. For everything. For failing to understand what I was going through. For speaking carelessly. For treating me like a burden when I needed support. Ryan stood beside her looking equally uncomfortable. I listened without interrupting. The apology seemed sincere. Yet sincerity does not erase consequences. It simply creates an opportunity for honesty. I thanked them for saying what needed to be said. Then I told them something I had learned over the years. Character reveals itself most clearly when circumstances become difficult. Success and comfort make kindness easy. Hardship reveals who people truly are. Neither Ryan nor Claire argued. They knew I was right. As the day continued, neighbors gathered around the property discussing construction plans and future possibilities. For the first time since the fire, laughter returned to the farm. Hope returned as well. That evening, after most people had left, Ethan and I stood together watching the sunset. The damaged fields no longer looked like an ending. They looked like the beginning of something new. Then Ethan handed me a folder and said there was one final part of his plan that nobody else knew about yet. I opened the folder slowly, expecting construction plans or financial documents. Instead, the first page contained a photograph. It was old and slightly faded. In the picture, a skinny 12-year-old boy stood beside a farmhouse porch holding a slice of apple pie. Standing next to him was a younger version of me. I laughed softly the moment I saw it. Ethan smiled. Then he asked me to keep turning pages. Inside the folder were dozens of photographs, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and copies of letters. Some I remembered. Many I had forgotten completely. Together they told a story that stretched across more than 3 decades. There were photographs from county fairs, church picnics, school science competitions, and holiday gatherings. There were notes Ethan had written as a teenager. One page contained a list of goals he created when he was 16 years old. Become successful. Help people. Never forget where I came from. Seeing those words affected me more than I expected. Then I reached the final section of the folder. There, attached to a formal document, was a letter addressed to me. Ethan encouraged me to read it. The letter explained that he had established a permanent trust to support the agricultural education program that would operate on the farm for generations. The trust would fund scholarships, training opportunities, mentorship programs, and community projects long after both of us were gone. But that was not the surprise. The surprise was the final paragraph. Ethan wrote that the farm would remain under my ownership for the rest of my life and that a leadership position within the educational foundation had been created specifically for me. He wanted me involved in shaping its future. Not as a symbolic figure. As a decision maker. For several moments, I could not speak. After losing so much, I had expected to spend my remaining years recovering from disaster. Instead, I was being offered a chance to build something meaningful. Something larger than myself. Ethan looked across the fields and said that success had given him many opportunities, but gratitude gave those opportunities purpose. Then he thanked me. Not for making phone calls. Not for reconnecting with him. He thanked me for opening my home to a lonely boy when nobody else realized how much he needed it. A few weeks later, construction began. New foundations appeared where empty spaces once stood. Trucks arrived carrying materials. Students from local schools visited to learn about the project. Volunteers offered assistance. The property slowly transformed from a symbol of loss into a symbol of renewal. During that time, Ryan and Claire remained part of my life. Our relationship improved, but it changed as well. Trust returns slowly. Sometimes it returns stronger because it is finally built on honesty. Claire worked hard to demonstrate that her apology was genuine. Ryan became more present. More thoughtful. More aware of the responsibilities that come with family. Whether those changes would last forever, I could not know. But they were trying, and that mattered. Nearly a year after the fire, we held the official opening ceremony for the new Agricultural Education Center. Hundreds of people attended. Farmers, teachers, students, community leaders. Ethan stood beside me as the ribbon was cut. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed across the property. Yet the moment I remember most happened afterward. A young girl approached and asked if this place really started because someone had helped a child many years ago. I smiled and told her yes. In a way, it had. As the crowd dispersed and the sun began setting behind the fields, I looked across the farm one last time. The fire had destroyed buildings. It had not destroyed purpose. It had revealed something far more important. The people who truly cared stayed. The people who remembered kindness returned. And the seeds we plant in others often grow long after we forget planting them. I lost a farm that year. What grew from the ashes was something far greater.